The Cairo sun beat mercilessly against the windows of the black Mercedes as it navigated through the chaotic streets of the Al Darb Al Amr district. Marcus Thornhill sat in the back seat, his tailored suit already showing signs of the oppressive heat, despite the air conditioning running at full blast. He wiped his brow with a handkerchief and gazed out at the sea of humanity flowing past. Street vendors hawking their wares, children darting between cars, women in colorful hijabs carrying baskets on their heads. "We're almost there, Mr. Thornhill," his driver, Ahmed, announced in accented English. "The carpet workshop is just ahead." Marcus nodded absently. He'd come to Egypt on business, seeking to establish direct relationships with textile manufacturers for his luxury home goods company. What had started as a routine sourcing trip had taken an unexpected turn when his local business consultant, Khalid, had mentioned a particular workshop known for producing exquisite hand-woven carpets that supposedly took months to complete and sold for fractions of their true worth. The working conditions, Khalid had warned over dinner the previous evening, his voice dropping low. "They are not what you Americans would find acceptable, but if you want the finest quality at the lowest prices, this is where you must go." Marcus had felt uncomfortable with the implication but had agreed to visit anyway. He told himself he needed to see the operation firsthand to understand the full supply chain. But there was something else driving him, something he couldn't quite name, a pull toward this particular place that defied rational explanation. The car pulled up in front of a nondescript building with peeling yellow paint. The entrance was narrow, barely wide enough for two people to pass through side by side. Arabic script adorned a small wooden sign above the door, and the windows were covered with thick metal grates. "This is it," Ahmed confirmed, putting the car in park. Marcus stepped out into the overwhelming heat and immediately felt sweat begin to form on his neck. The street smelled of spices, exhaust fumes, and something else, something ancient and slightly acrid that seemed to emanate from the very stones of the buildings. Khalid emerged from a cafe across the street and approached with a wide smile. "Mr. Thornhill, right on time. Come, let me introduce you to Mr. Rashid, the owner." They entered the building and descended a narrow staircase that led underground. The temperature dropped noticeably, but the air grew thick and dusty. As they reached the bottom, Marcus heard the rhythmic sound of looms, a clicking, clacking symphony that seemed to echo off the stone walls. The workshop was larger than he'd expected, stretching back into shadow. Fluorescent lights hung from the low ceiling, casting harsh white light on row after row of large wooden looms. At each loom sat a worker, most of them women and young girls, their fingers moving with practiced precision as they tied thousands of tiny knots. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. The conditions were worse than he'd imagined. The workers sat on hard wooden benches, hunched over their work for what must have been hours. There was no ventilation except for a few small windows near the ceiling. The air was thick with wool fibers that caught in the light like snow. Several of the workers coughed periodically, their lungs clearly affected by the constant exposure. "Mr. Thornhill," a portly man in a stained galabeah approached, arms outstretched. "Welcome, welcome." "I am Rashid. Khalid has told me so much about you." Marcus shook the man's hand reluctantly. "Thank you for allowing me to visit. Please, come see our finest work." Rashid led them deeper into the workshop, past worker after worker. Marcus noticed that none of them looked up as he passed. They kept their eyes fixed on their work, fingers never stopping their intricate dance. They stopped at a loom near the back where an elaborate carpet depicting a garden scene was taking shape. The detail was extraordinary, each leaf and flower rendered in silk and wool with colors that seemed to glow even in the harsh fluorescent light. "This piece will take 8 months to complete," Rashid boasted. "See the knot count? More than 1,000 per square inch. This is true Persian technique, brought to Egypt centuries ago." "Who's working on this?" Marcus asked, trying to see past the loom to the worker beyond. "One of my best," Rashid said, then called out in Arabic, "Layla, stand up and greet our visitor." A figure rose slowly from behind the loom. Marcus found himself looking at a young woman, perhaps in her mid-20s, with dark hair pulled back in a simple braid. She wore a faded blue dress that had clearly seen better days, and her hands were stained with dyes. But it was her eyes that stopped Marcus cold. They were hazel, not the deep brown he'd expected, but a distinctive greenish gold that seemed to catch and hold the light. Eyes he'd seen before, though he couldn't immediately place where. "This is Layla," Rashid said dismissively. "She's been with us for how long now?" He waved his hand. "Many years. Very skilled, Very fast. She can complete work that would take others twice as long. Layla kept her eyes downcast, her posture one of complete submission. But in that brief moment when their gazes had met, Marcus had seen something else. A flash of intelligence, of awareness, of a spirit not quite broken. "Does she speak English?" Marcus asked. Rashid laughed. "Some of them know a few words, maybe. But Layla, she doesn't speak much at all. Never has. Not even in Arabic. Quiet as a mouse, that one." "How much do you pay her?" The question was out before Marcus could stop himself. Khalid shot him a warning look, but Rashid merely shrugged. "She receives room and board, of course. A place to sleep, food every day. This is more than many have. And she earns a small wage, enough for her needs." "How small?" The atmosphere in the workshop suddenly grew tense. Rashid's smile faded slightly. "Mr. Thornhill, perhaps we should discuss business matters in my office upstairs. It is more comfortable there, and we have tea." But Marcus couldn't look away from Layla. She had returned to her seat and resumed her work, but he could see her hands trembling slightly as she tied the knots. There was something about her, something that reached into his chest and squeezed his heart like a vice. "I'd like to know more about her," Marcus said quietly. "Where is she from? How did she come to work here?" Rashid's expression darkened. "Mr. Thornhill, with all respect, I did not invite you here to discuss my workers. You came to see the carpets, to discuss business. Now shall we—" "How much?" Marcus interrupted, his voice harder now. "How much would it cost for her to leave here? To be free of her contract or debt or whatever it is that keeps her here?" The workshop had gone quiet. The other workers had stopped their weaving, sensing the confrontation. Khalid looked horrified, tugging at Marcus's sleeve. "Mr. Thornhill, please, this is not done." "Everything has a price," Marcus said, staring directly at Rashid. "Name yours." Rashid's eyes narrowed, calculating. "She owes me a great deal. The years of training, the room and board, the material she has wasted in learning." "How much?" 50,000 American dollars. Khalid gasped. It was an outrageous sum, more than any worker could possibly owe. Marcus knew he was being played, that Rashid saw a wealthy American and decided to test just how far he could push. But when Marcus glanced back at Layla, he saw that she had raised her head slightly. Those hazel eyes were fixed on him now, and in them he saw something that made his decision for him. Hope. Desperate, fragile, barely daring to exist hope. "Done," Marcus said. "I'll wire the money to your account today. She comes with me now." The next hour passed in a blur of negotiations, paperwork, and thinly veiled threats. Rashid tried to backpedal, to add conditions and additional fees, but Marcus held firm. He'd made plenty of difficult business deals in his career, and he knew when he had the upper hand. Rashid might be angry about losing a skilled worker, but $50,000 for someone he paid pennies to was too good a windfall to refuse. Finally, with documents signed and money transferred, Marcus found himself standing outside the workshop with Layla beside him. She carried nothing. No bag, no possessions. Everything she owned, it seemed, was the faded blue dress she wore and a thin shawl draped over her shoulders. Ahmed had pulled the car around, and Khalid was still sputtering about impropriety and cultural misunderstandings. Marcus ignored him, opening the car door for Layla himself. She hesitated, her eyes darting between Marcus and the building behind them, as if she couldn't quite believe this was real. "It's okay," Marcus said softly. "You're free. You don't have to go back there." She looked at him for a long moment, those hazel eyes searching his face for something. Then, slowly, she climbed into the car. The drive back to Marcus's hotel was silent. Layla sat pressed against the far door, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed straight ahead. Marcus didn't push her to speak. He was still trying to process what he'd just done, the impulsive decision that had just cost him $50,000 and complicated his business trip beyond measure. What was he going to do with her? He couldn't just leave her on the street. But he also couldn't take her back to the States without proper documentation, visas, all sorts of legal requirements. The practical part of his brain was screaming at him that he'd made a terrible mistake, that he should have walked away, that this was not his problem to solve. But every time he looked at her, at the way she held herself so carefully, at the fading bruises on her arms that he now noticed, at the too thin frame that spoke of inadequate food, he knew he'd made the only choice he could have made. They arrived at the Four Seasons, and the doorman opened the car door with a flourish. Layla shrank back from the opulent entrance, clearly overwhelmed. "It's all right," Marcus said again. "This is where I'm staying." You'll have your own room, your own space. We need to figure out what happens next, but for now, you're safe." In the lobby, Marcus spoke with the manager, arranging for a second room adjacent to his own. The manager's eyes flickered between Marcus and Layla, clearly making assumptions, but he was too professional to comment. Within minutes, they had a key card and were heading up to the 7th floor. Marcus showed Layla to her room, a beautiful space with a king bed, pristine white linens, a marble bathroom, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Nile. She stood in the center of the room, turning slowly, her eyes wide with wonder. "The bathroom is through there," Marcus explained. "There's soap, shampoo, towels, everything you need. And there's a phone by the bed. If you need anything at all, you can dial 0 for the front desk. Or you can call my room. I'm right next door, room 714. She still hadn't spoken. Marcus wasn't sure if she couldn't understand him or if she was simply too shocked to respond. "Are you hungry?" he asked, miming eating. "Food? Would you like me to order you something?" Finally, she nodded. A tiny, hesitant movement. Marcus picked up the room phone and ordered a selection of dishes from room service, not sure what she might like. When he hung up, he found her watching him carefully. "Listen," he said, moving to sit in one of the chairs by the window, keeping distance between them so she wouldn't feel threatened. "I know this must all be very confusing. I'm not entirely sure why I did what I did back there, but I couldn't just walk away. I've seen a lot of things in my travels, but that workshop..." He shook his head. "No one should have to live like that." Layla moved slowly to the other chair and sat down, perched on the edge as if ready to flee at any moment. "My name is Marcus Thornhill," he continued. "I'm from Boston. That's in the United States. I came here on business to look at carpets and textiles for my company. I have a daughter." His voice caught slightly. "I had a daughter, Sarah. She would be about your age now, I think. Mid-20s. The words came out before he could stop them, opening a wound he'd kept carefully sealed for years. He saw Layla's expression shift, a flash of something, sympathy, recognition, crossing her face. "She disappeared 15 years ago," Marcus heard himself saying. "We were on vacation in Athens. Sarah was 10. She wanted to see the street market, and my ex-wife Margaret said it was too crowded, too dangerous. They had a fight. You know how mothers and daughters can be. Sarah stormed off. We thought she'd just gone back to the hotel to pout." His hands clenched into fists. "But she never came back. We searched for months. The police, private investigators, every resource I could throw at the problem. Nothing. It's like she vanished into thin air." He looked up to find Layla staring at him intently, those hazel eyes. Sarah's eyes, he realized with a jolt. Sarah had had eyes that exact shade, that same unusual greenish gold that had always made her stand out. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, wiping at his face. "I don't know why I'm telling you this. You've got your own problems without listening to mine. The food should be here soon, and then I'll let you rest. Tomorrow we'll figure out next steps, getting you proper papers, maybe finding your family if you have one." There was a knock at the door, room service arriving with impressive speed. Marcus tipped the waiter generously and wheeled the cart into the room. He'd ordered mezza, grilled chicken, rice, salads, bread, and fruit. Layla's eyes widened at the spread. "Please, eat as much as you want," Marcus said. "I'll be next door if you need anything." He was almost to the door when he heard it. Soft, hoarse, as if the voice hadn't been used in a very long time. "Sarah." Marcus froze. He turned slowly. Layla was standing now, her whole body trembling. "What did you say?" "Sarah," she repeated, louder this time. "My name was Sarah." The room seemed to tilt. Marcus gripped the doorframe to steady himself. "What?" Layla, Sarah, lifted her hands to her face, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I didn't remember for so long. They told me my name was Layla, that I had always been Layla, that my family was dead, that no one was looking for me. But I never forgot the market, the crowds, the man who grabbed me and put something over my face, the smell, so sweet it made me dizzy. Then waking up somewhere dark and cold and not understanding what anyone was saying." Marcus crossed the room in 3 strides. He stopped just short of her, afraid to touch her, afraid she might shatter or disappear. "Sarah, is it really you?" She looked up at him, and even through the years and the hardship and the changes, he saw it. The little girl who'd loved strawberry ice cream and collecting seashells, who'd been learning piano and dreamed of becoming a veterinarian. His daughter, his lost little girl. "Dad?" The word came out broken, uncertain, as if she wasn't sure she had the right to say it. Marcus caught her as her legs gave out, wrapping his arms around her as 15 years of grief and rage and helpless longing came pouring out. She sobbed against his chest, and he realized he was crying too. Great heaving sobs that he couldn't have contained if he'd tried. "I've got you," he whispered into her hair. "I've got you. You're safe now. You're safe." They sank to the floor together, holding on to each other like drowning people grasping at wreckage. The food grew cold on the cart, forgotten. The Nile flowed past the window, ancient and indifferent. Somewhere in the city below, life continued its chaotic dance. But in that hotel room, a miracle was unfolding. The kind that doesn't happen in real life. The kind that people don't believe in. The kind that Marcus had stopped hoping for years ago. Eventually, the tears subsided enough for them to speak. They moved to the couch, Sarah still clutching Marcus's hand as if afraid he might disappear. "Tell me everything," Marcus said. "From the beginning. What happened that day in Athens?" Sarah's voice was halting at first, rusty from disuse, but gradually it grew stronger. The story came out in fragments, pieces of a nightmare she'd lived for half her life. The man who'd taken her had drugged her and smuggled her out of Greece. She remembered being on a boat, then a truck, then another boat. For weeks, maybe months, time had blurred. She'd been moved from place to place, always locked in dark rooms, always with other children who cried in languages she didn't understand. Eventually, she'd ended up in Cairo. She'd been sold, that was the word she used, and Marcus felt his blood boil, to a man who ran a textile workshop. She was put to work immediately, learning to tie the knots for carpets and rugs. The work was hard, but she was told if she worked well, she'd earn money to be sent home. "But it never happened," Sarah said, her voice flat. "There was always some debt, some fee, some reason why I couldn't leave. After a while I stopped asking. They changed my name, gave me papers that said I was Egyptian, born in Cairo. When I tried to tell people I was American, that I'd been kidnapped, they punished me. Eventually I learned to just be quiet, to disappear inside myself." "And you never remembered your real name?" Marcus asked, struggling to understand. "I think the drugs they gave me at the beginning did something to my memory," Sarah explained. "Everything before waking up in that dark room was fuzzy, like a dream. I knew I had parents, that I'd had a different life, but I couldn't picture faces or remember names. It was like trying to hold on to water. The harder I tried, the faster it slipped away." "So what changed? How did you remember?" Sarah looked at him, and he saw recognition dawn in her eyes again. "Your eyes," she said simply. "When you came into the workshop, I looked up and saw your eyes, and something just clicked. I knew those eyes. I knew you. And then everything started coming back. Bits and pieces at first, then more and more. The hotel room in Athens, Mom reading her book by the pool, you teaching me to swim, our golden retriever Max, our house with the blue shutters." Marcus was crying again, silently this time. "Max died 5 years ago," he said. "I'm sorry. But the house is still there. The same blue shutters. Your room is exactly as you left it. Your mother, Margaret, she couldn't bear to change anything. She visits sometimes, just sits in there looking at your things." "Mom," Sarah whispered. Is she okay?" "She'll be better than okay when she finds out you're alive," Marcus said. "She never gave up hope. Not really. Even after the police stopped investigating, even after the private detectives came up empty, she always believed you were out there somewhere. We divorced. The grief was too much, but we still talk sometimes. Always about you." They talked through the night, ordering more food at some point, neither of them able to sleep. Sarah told him about the workshop, about the other girls trapped there, about Rashid's cruelty and the endless days of backbreaking work. Marcus told her about the years of searching, the false leads, the moments when he'd thought he'd found her only to have hope cruelly dashed. "I should have kept looking," Marcus said at one point, guilt washing over him. "I should never have stopped." "You couldn't have known," Sarah said. "They took me so far, changed me so completely. How could you have found me? Even I didn't know who I was." But Marcus would carry that guilt forever. He knew. 15 years she'd been enslaved, working in that hellhole, while he'd lived in comfort in Boston. 15 years she'd needed him, and he hadn't been there. As dawn broke over Cairo, painting the Nile in shades of gold and rose, they finally fell silent, exhausted but unwilling to let go of each other. "What happens now?" Sarah asked quietly. Marcus had been thinking about that. "Now, we go home. It won't be easy. We'll need to deal with paperwork, embassies, proof of identity. But I have resources, lawyers. We'll make it happen. And Sarah?" He waited until she met his eyes. You're never going back there. Never. Whatever it takes, however long it takes, you're coming home. Sarah leaned her head against his shoulder, and for the first time in 15 years, Marcus felt something he'd thought he'd lost forever. Complete joy. Not happiness, which was fleeting, but joy that went soul deep, the kind that comes from having your broken pieces made whole again. The road ahead would be difficult, he knew. Sarah would need medical care, therapy, time to heal from the trauma she'd endured. There would be legal complications, investigations, possibly even criminal proceedings against the people who'd taken and kept her. And there was Margaret to tell, extended family, friends. So many people who'd grieved for Sarah and needed to know she was alive. But they would face it together, father and daughter, reunited by chance and miracle in a city ancient enough to believe in both. The next weeks were a whirlwind. Marcus hired the best lawyers in Cairo, who navigated the bureaucratic maze of Egyptian and American legal systems with impressive efficiency. The U.S. Embassy became involved, and when Sarah's story came out, both who she was and where she'd been found, it created an international incident. Egyptian authorities raided Rashid's workshop, and dozens of others like it, finding conditions even worse than Marcus had witnessed. Dozens of workers, many of them children, were freed. Rashid and several other workshop owners were arrested on charges of human trafficking and forced labor. The case made headlines worldwide. Margaret flew to Cairo within 48 hours of Marcus's phone call. He'd never forget the moment Sarah saw her mother for the first time in 15 years. The way they'd run to each other across the hotel lobby. Both of them crying, both of them talking at once, trying to fit years of loss into minutes of reunion. The three of them spent hours together in those first days, talking and crying and laughing and crying some more. It was healing and heartbreaking all at once. Healing because they were together again, heartbreaking because of all the years they'd lost. Dr. Amira Hassan, a trauma specialist recommended by the embassy, began working with Sarah immediately. She explained to Marcus and Margaret that Sarah's journey would be long and difficult, that the trauma of abduction, enslavement, and lost identity would have lasting effects. But she's strong, Dr. Hassan said after one of their sessions. Stronger than she knows. She survived when many wouldn't have. That strength will serve her well in recovery. Sarah also underwent medical examinations that revealed the toll 15 years of hard labor had taken on her body. Her hands were scarred and arthritic from the repetitive work of tying knots. Her lungs showed damage from inhaling wool fibers. She was malnourished, anemic, and had several untreated injuries that had healed poorly. But the doctors assured them that with proper care she would recover. She was young, resilient. Her body could heal, even if her mind would carry scars forever. Through it all, Marcus stayed by her side. He canceled all his business meetings, extended his trip indefinitely. His company could run without him for a while. His daughter couldn't. They fell into a routine of sorts. Mornings with Dr. Hassan. Afternoons exploring Cairo together, not the tourist sites, but quiet places where Sarah could practice being in the world again without crowds or pressure. The botanical gardens became a favorite, a green oasis where they could sit and talk or just be silent together. Sarah was learning to speak again, literally and metaphorically. Her voice had been suppressed for so long that even forming opinions felt strange to her at first. Marcus and Margaret had to consciously work to ask her what she wanted, what she preferred, what she thought, and then wait patiently as she struggled to answer. "I don't know," became her most common phrase, followed by, "What do you think I should do?" "It doesn't matter what we think," Marcus would tell her gently. "It matters what you want. You get to choose now. You're in control." The concept seemed foreign to her, even frightening. But gradually, slowly, she began to find her voice. She wanted to go home to Boston. She wanted to see her old room, her old school, the places she remembered from childhood. She wanted to try strawberry ice cream again, to see if it was as good as she remembered. She wanted to learn piano again, though her damaged hands might not be able to play as they once could. She wanted to help the other girls who'd been trapped in workshops like Rashid's, to make sure they got home safely, that they had resources and support. Marcus made all of it happen. He donated a substantial sum to an Egyptian NGO that worked with trafficking victims. He connected with International Justice Mission and other organizations fighting modern slavery. He used his business connections and wealth to fund rehabilitation programs, legal assistance, and family reunification efforts. It didn't bring back Sarah's 15 lost years, but it helped. It gave meaning to the suffering. 3 months after that fateful day at the workshop, they finally returned to Boston. Sarah had proper documentation now, a new passport, medical clearance to travel. Margaret had gone ahead a week earlier to prepare the house, to let extended family know, to try to manage the media attention that was still swirling around Sarah's rescue. As the plane descended toward Logan Airport, Sarah pressed her face to the window, watching the city come into view, the harbor, the downtown skyline, the neighborhood spreading out in all directions. "Do you remember it?" Marcus asked. "Some," Sarah said. "But it looks different. Smaller, maybe? Or I'm bigger." She turned to him with a slight smile, something that was still rare enough to make his heart soar. "That sounds stupid." "It doesn't," Marcus assured her. "You left as a child. You're returning as a woman. Everything looks different through adult eyes." At the house, their house with its blue shutters and the old oak tree in the front yard, Margaret was waiting on the porch. She'd respected Sarah's request not to have a big reunion party, not to invite extended family yet. This moment was just for them. Marcus watched as Sarah climbed out of the car and stood for a long moment, staring at the house. He could only imagine what she was feeling, the collision of memory and reality, past and present, the child she'd been, and the woman she'd become. Then she started walking up the path, slowly at first, then faster. Margaret met her halfway, and they embraced on the front lawn, holding each other as if they'd never let go. Inside, the house smelled the way Marcus remembered. Margaret's jasmine perfume, old books, the lemon oil she used on the furniture. Sarah moved through the rooms like a ghost, touching things tentatively. The back of the couch where she used to read, the kitchen table where they'd eaten dinner every night, the photos on the mantel that documented a life interrupted. Then she climbed the stairs to her old room. Margaret had kept it exactly as Sarah had left it that last morning in Boston before they'd departed for Greece. The bed was made with her favorite purple comforter. Posters of boy bands and puppies hung on the walls. Books lined the shelves. Chapter books for a 10-year-old. Not the adult literature she might choose now. Her desk still had homework on it, half-finished math problems from a summer packet. It was a shrine to a child who no longer existed, and they all felt the wrongness of it. Sarah stood in the center of the room, turning slowly. "Can we change it?" she asked quietly. "I know you kept it for me, and I appreciate that, I do. But this isn't me anymore. That little girl." Her voice broke. "She's gone." "Of course we can change it," Margaret said quickly, wiping at her eyes. "We can do whatever you want. Paint, new furniture, anything. I think I'd like to start over," Sarah said. "Keep a few things, but mostly new, a fresh start." Over the following weeks, they renovated Sarah's room together. They painted the walls a soft gray blue that reminded Sarah of the Nile at dawn. They bought new furniture, a bed she picked out herself, a comfortable chair for reading, modern shelves for books she would choose now. They kept some mementos, a few photos, her old jewelry box, a stuffed elephant she'd loved as a child. The rest went into storage, too precious to discard but no longer fitting the person she'd become. Sarah also began the process of reconnecting with her old life in other ways. The school district arranged for her to take equivalency exams so she could earn her high school diploma. A tutor came to the house 3 times a week to help her fill in the educational gaps. She was bright, the tutor reported, remarkably so given everything she'd been through. Her time in Egypt had taught her Arabic, and her mind was hungry for learning, making up for lost time. She also continued therapy, now with Dr. Reeves, a trauma specialist in Boston who had experience working with trafficking survivors. The sessions were hard, often leaving Sarah exhausted and raw, but she committed to the work with the same determination she'd once applied to tying carpet knots. "I survived it," she told Marcus one evening as they sat in the living room. He was reading a business report. She was working through a calculus problem. "I can survive talking about it too." Marcus looked at his daughter, because she was his daughter, no question, no matter how many years had passed or how much she'd changed, and felt pride surge through him. She was indeed strong, stronger than he could have imagined. 6 months after returning to Boston, Sarah asked if they could visit the organization Marcus had been funding in Egypt, the one that helped trafficking survivors. She wanted to talk to other girls who'd been through similar experiences, wanted to see if her story could help them somehow. Marcus made the arrangements, and they returned to Cairo together. This time the city felt different. It wasn't the place of nightmares and enslavement anymore. It was also the place where she'd been found, where her life had restarted. At the rehabilitation center, Sarah met dozens of young women, some younger than her, some older. all with stories of exploitation and survival. She spoke to them in Arabic, her voice strong and clear, telling them that life after trauma was possible, that they could heal, that they could reclaim themselves. Marcus watched from the back of the room, barely recognizing the confident young woman standing at the front. This wasn't the terrified girl he'd found in the workshop, or even the tentative daughter who'd first come home. This was someone new, forged from pain and survival, but also from hope and determination. After the presentation, one of the girls approached Sarah hesitantly. "Did you really forget who you were?" she asked in Arabic. Sarah nodded. "For a long time. They told me I was someone else, and I believed them." "How did you remember?" Sarah glanced back at Marcus. "Someone reminded me," she said simply. "Someone looked at me and saw who I really was, not who they'd tried to make me. And that was enough to start breaking through." That night, back at the Four Seasons, Sarah had insisted on staying at the same hotel, facing that memory head-on. Marcus and Sarah sat by the window overlooking the Nile. "I've been thinking," Sarah said, "about what I want to do. With my life, I mean. And I want to help people like me, trafficking victims, especially children. I want to work with organizations that rescue them, rehabilitate them, reunite them with families. I want to be the person I wish had found me years ago." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "That's a beautiful goal, Sarah, but it'll be hard, painful, always having to confront these issues, these stories." "I know," Sarah interrupted, "but it'll also be meaningful. All those years in the workshop, I felt like my life was being wasted, like I was just existing. Now I have a chance to make those years count for something, to turn suffering into purpose. Then I'll help you however I can," Marcus promised. "We'll set up a foundation, or fund your education in social work or law, or whatever field you need. Whatever it takes." Sarah smiled, a real smile, the kind that reached her eyes. "Thank you. But Dad, I need to do some of this myself. I can't just have everything handed to me. I need to work for it, to earn it." Does that make sense? It did. Perfect sense. She needed to prove to herself that she was capable, that she had agency, that she was more than what had been done to her. "It makes complete sense," Marcus said, "but I'm still paying for college." Sarah laughed, and the sound was like music. 2 years later, Sarah enrolled at Boston University, majoring in social work with a minor in international relations. She moved into a dorm, experiencing the college life she'd missed. She made friends, carefully at first, but gradually allowing people in. She dated occasionally, though intimacy remained challenging. Dr. Reeves assured her this was normal, that trust took time to rebuild, especially when it had been so profoundly violated. She continued her advocacy work, speaking at conferences about human trafficking, consulting with NGOs, sharing her story when it might help others. She also testified before Congress, supporting legislation to strengthen laws against trafficking and increase support for survivors. The media attention was intense at times, intrusive, but Sarah handled it with remarkable grace, staying focused on the message rather than her personal pain. Marcus and Margaret, though divorced, found common ground in supporting their daughter. They attended her speaking engagements together, celebrated her achievements, provided stability as she navigated her new life. On Sarah's 28th birthday, 3 years after her rescue, the family gathered at the house with the blue shutters. It was a small celebration, just the 3 of them and a few close friends Sarah had made in college. They ate cake, opened presents, and as evening fell, found themselves sitting on the back porch watching fireflies drift across the yard. "Do you ever wonder," Margaret asked softly, "what your life would have been like if Athens had never happened? If we just stayed home that summer?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "I used to," she finally said, "especially in the beginning, back at the workshop. I'd imagine this whole other life, graduating high school, going to prom, college, maybe becoming a vet like I'd always wanted. A normal life. And now?" Marcus asked. "Now I think, maybe this is the life I was meant to have. Not the suffering, I wouldn't wish that on anyone. But this purpose, this work, the girls I've helped, the families that have been reunited because of the awareness we've raised, the laws that have changed. Maybe all of it happened so I could be here, doing this." She looked at her parents, her eyes, those distinctive hazel eyes that had led to her recognition, clear and certain. "I'm not saying I'm grateful for what happened. I'm not. Those 15 years were stolen from me, and I'll never get them back. But I'm learning to accept that I can't change the past. I can only shape the future." "When did you get so wise?" Margaret asked, reaching over to squeeze her daughter's hand. Sarah smiled. I had good teachers, a dad who never stopped believing in impossible things, a mom who kept a room ready for 15 years just in case. You both taught me that love doesn't quit, even when hope seems foolish. Marcus felt tears sting his eyes, something that still happened frequently when it came to Sarah. We love you so much, sweetheart. I know, Sarah said simply, and that's what saved me. Not just Dad finding me, though that was the catalyst, but knowing, even when I couldn't remember exactly, that somewhere someone loved me, that I mattered to someone. That alone kept me alive in the darkest times. They sat in comfortable silence as the sky darkened and stars began to emerge. Marcus thought about that day in Cairo, walking into a workshop he'd almost skipped, the chain of decisions and coincidences that had led him to that exact place at that exact time. Some might call it fate or divine intervention. Marcus didn't know what to call it, but he was grateful for it every single day. There's something I've been meaning to tell you both, Sarah said, breaking the silence. I've been accepted into a graduate program, International Human Rights Law at Columbia. Margaret gasped with delight. Sarah, that's wonderful. When did you apply? Marcus asked, surprised she hadn't mentioned it. A few months ago. I wasn't sure I'd get in, so I didn't want to say anything until I knew for sure. But I got the acceptance letter last week. She paused, then continued. There's more. I've also been offered a position with the International Justice Mission after I graduate. They want me to work on their anti-trafficking initiatives in Southeast Asia. Marcus felt pride and fear war within him. Southeast Asia meant she'd be far away, potentially in dangerous situations, but it also meant she'd be doing exactly what she was meant to do. That's incredible, Sarah, he said, forcing his voice to remain steady. You're going to change so many lives. I'm terrified, Sarah admitted, but also excited, and I know I can do this. You raised me to be strong, even if I forgot that for a while. You never forgot, Margaret said firmly. You just had to find your way back to yourself, and you did. You found your way home. Home. The word resonated in the warm evening air. Sarah had indeed found her way home, not just to this house in Boston, but to herself. She'd reclaimed her identity, her purpose, her future. The next 2 years passed quickly. Sarah excelled at Columbia, her unique perspective as a survivor giving depth to her academic work that her professors found remarkable. She wrote papers on victim rehabilitation, on the intersection of poverty and trafficking, on the psychological impact of forced labor. Her work was published in journals, cited by other researchers. During summer breaks, she interned with various organizations, traveling to Thailand, Cambodia, and Nepal to work directly with survivors and support rescue operations. Each trip was emotionally exhausting, but professionally fulfilling. Marcus worried constantly, but tried not to show it. He'd found his daughter against impossible odds. He couldn't keep her trapped in safety. She needed to fly, to use her gifts and experiences to help others. So he supported her from afar, donating to the organizations she worked with, using his business connections to open doors for her advocacy work. Margaret had moved on with her life as well, finding love again with a kind man named Robert, who accepted that Sarah would always be her priority. They married in a quiet ceremony, with Sarah standing as maid of honor, tears streaming down her face as she watched her mother embrace happiness again. The night before Sarah was scheduled to leave for her position with IJM in Bangkok, Marcus took her to dinner at their favorite Italian restaurant, the same place they'd gone to celebrate when she'd gotten her driver's license at 26, having to learn something most people mastered at 16. I'm proud of you, Marcus said over pasta and wine. More than I can possibly express. I couldn't have done any of this without you, Sarah replied. Without that crazy decision to walk into a random workshop in Cairo. What made you do it, Dad? Really? You never actually told me. Marcus thought back to that sweltering afternoon, to the pull he'd felt toward that particular place. Honestly, I don't know. Maybe it was just instinct. Maybe I recognized something in you before I consciously understood what I was seeing. Or maybe, he paused, considering. Maybe parents and children have a connection that transcends memory and recognition. Maybe some part of me knew, on a level deeper than thought, that you were there. Do you believe that? Sarah asked. In that kind of connection? I didn't used to, Marcus admitted. But then I found you. So yes, I believe in impossible things now. I have to. I'm living one. Sarah reached across the table and took his hand. Promise me something? Anything. Don't spend the rest of your life feeling guilty about the years I was lost. You did everything you could. The fact that you never stopped looking, that you were still sensitive enough to injustice, that you noticed one girl in a workshop full of them. That's what matters. You saved me, Dad. Let that be enough. Marcus squeezed her hand, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. She was right, he knew. He had to let go of the guilt, to focus on the miracle of having her back rather than the tragedy of losing her in the first place. I'll try, he promised. And you promised me something too? What? Stay safe, call me regularly, and remember that no matter how far away you go or how independent you become, you always have a home here. The blue shutters will always be waiting. Sarah smiled through her own tears. I promise. They finished dinner talking about logistics, her apartment in Bangkok, her travel schedule, the training program she'd go through before starting field work. Normal things. The kind of conversations any father and daughter might have. It felt miraculous in its ordinariness. The next morning, at Logan Airport, Marcus and Margaret both came to see Sarah off. She hugged them each tightly, and for a moment Marcus was transported back to that hotel room in Cairo, holding his daughter for the first time in 15 years. I love you both, Sarah said. Thank you for never giving up on me. We never could, Margaret said. You're our daughter, our miracle. Sarah shouldered her backpack, so much lighter than the burden she'd carried for years, and headed toward security. At the checkpoint, she turned back and waved one more time, her hazel eyes bright with tears and determination. Marcus waved back, watching until she disappeared into the crowd of travelers. He felt Margaret slip her hand into his, and they stood together, united in their love for their daughter, even if no longer united in marriage. She's going to be okay, Margaret said softly. More than okay. She's going to be extraordinary. Marcus nodded, believing it with his whole heart. Sarah had survived the unsurvivable, found herself when she'd been lost in every possible way, and transformed trauma into purpose. She was already extraordinary. The world was just about to find out. 5 years later, Marcus stood in a crowded auditorium at the United Nations in Geneva. He was there with Margaret and Robert, along with hundreds of other people, all gathered to watch Sarah receive an International Humanitarian Award for her work combating human trafficking. She'd spent those 5 years in Southeast Asia, working tirelessly with IJM and other organizations. She'd helped rescue over 300 trafficking victims, most of them children. She'd testified in court cases that had resulted in the conviction of dozens of traffickers. She'd written a book, part memoir, part advocacy, part practical guide for identifying and helping victims, that had become required reading in social work programs around the world. She'd also fallen in love with a fellow IJM worker, a man named David who understood her past and supported her mission. They'd gotten engaged 3 months ago, and Marcus had already given his enthusiastic blessing. Now, watching her take the stage to accept her award, Marcus felt his heart might burst with pride. This woman, confident, articulate, powerful, had once been a terrified girl sitting at a loom in a Cairo basement. The journey from there to here was almost impossible to comprehend. Sarah began her acceptance speech, her voice clear and strong. I stand before you today representing the millions of people still trapped in modern slavery. For 15 years, I was one of them. I know what it's like to have your identity stripped away, to be treated as property, to lose hope of ever being free. She paused, her eyes finding Marcus in the audience. But I also know what it's like to be rescued, to be reminded that you are human, that you matter, that you deserve dignity and freedom. I know what it's like to be given a second chance at life. My father likes to say that finding me was a miracle, and maybe it was, but miracles shouldn't be necessary. No child should have to hope for a miracle to save them from slavery. That's why we do this work, to create systems and laws and awareness that make rescue systematic rather than miraculous. The audience applauded, and Sarah continued, outlining the work still to be done, the children still waiting for rescue, the need for continued commitment and resources. But Marcus barely heard the rest. He was remembering that day in Cairo, the moment their eyes had met across a dusty workshop, the moment everything changed. Some people, he reflected, go their whole lives without experiencing a true miracle. He'd been given one. And not just finding Sarah. The real miracle was watching her transform suffering into purpose, victim into advocate, lost into found. After the ceremony, they all went to dinner. Sarah and David, Marcus, Margaret and Robert, and a few of Sarah's colleagues from IJM. The conversation was lively, full of laughter and stories, plans for the wedding, and discussions of future projects. At one point, David leaned over to Marcus and said quietly, "Thank you for raising such an incredible woman. I know the circumstances were unimaginable, but she talks about you all the time. About how you taught her that one person's decision to act can change everything." Marcus shook his head. "I didn't teach her that. She taught me. I was just a businessman looking at carpets. She's the one who survived, who fought her way back, who decided to use her experience to help others. That's all her. Nature and nurture," David said with a smile. "She got her stubbornness and her sense of justice from somewhere." Later that evening, as they walked along the lakefront in Geneva, Marcus found himself alone with Sarah for a few minutes. The others had stopped to look at something in a shop window. "Are you happy, sweetheart?" Marcus asked. It was a question he'd asked often over the years, needing reassurance that she was healing, moving forward, finding joy. Sarah looked at him, those hazel eyes reflecting the lights dancing on the lake. "Yes, Dad, I really am. The past doesn't define me anymore. It's part of my story, but it's not the whole story. You made sure of that." "You made sure of that," Marcus corrected. "I just opened a door. You're the one who walked through it and kept walking until you found your way." "We both did it," Sarah said, linking her arm through his. "That's the truth. You found me, but I let myself be found. You offered freedom, but I chose to take it. You supported my recovery, but I did the work. It was teamwork." Marcus laughed softly. "Teamwork. I like that." They stood together, watching the water, comfortable in the silence. So much had been lost. 15 years they could never reclaim. A childhood interrupted, innocence stolen. But so much had also been found. Each other, purpose, hope, healing. "Do you remember what you told me that first night in Cairo?" Sarah asked. "In the hotel room, when you were talking about why you'd bought my freedom?" Marcus thought back, trying to recall his exact words through the haze of emotion and disbelief that had colored that night. "You said you had a daughter who disappeared," Sarah continued, "and you said you'd never stopped looking. Even though you told me about your lost daughter, some part of you was still looking for her. That's why you saw me. That's why you couldn't walk away." She turned to face him fully. "Love doesn't quit. That's what you taught me. Even when hope seems foolish, even when everyone tells you to move on, even when 15 years have passed, love doesn't quit. And that's the principle I've built my entire life around now. I don't quit on the people I'm trying to help, because you never quit on me." Marcus pulled his daughter into a hug. This woman who had been lost and found, broken and rebuilt, silenced and given voice. "I'm so proud of you," he whispered. "So incredibly proud." "I know, Dad," Sarah said. "I know." The others rejoined them, and they continued their walk, talking and laughing as the Swiss evening settled around them. To anyone watching, they were just a normal family enjoying vacation together. But Marcus knew better. There was nothing normal about their story. It was extraordinary, miraculous, impossible, and yet completely real. He'd gone to Cairo looking for carpets and found his daughter. He'd walked into a workshop guided by instinct he couldn't explain and encountered eyes he'd thought he'd never see again. He'd made an impulsive decision that cost $50,000 and gave him back something priceless. Some might call it chance. Others might call it fate. Marcus called it love, the kind that transcends time and distance, and even memory itself, the kind that sees the truth of a person beneath whatever disguise life has forced them to wear, the kind that doesn't quit. As they walked through the streets of Geneva, Sarah laughing at something David said, Marcus sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. To whom or what, he wasn't entirely sure. But gratitude nonetheless, for second chances and impossible reunions and daughters who refused to stay lost. The night was beautiful. The company was precious. And for the first time in 15 years, Marcus's family was complete again. Not the same as it had been. That was impossible. But whole in a new way, rebuilt from broken pieces into something perhaps even stronger than before. Sarah caught his eye and smiled. And in that smile, Marcus saw everything. The little girl who'd loved strawberry ice cream, the teenager she'd never gotten to be, the young woman who'd survived the unsurvivable, and the remarkable person she'd become. All of her, all at once, finally free. "Thank you, Dad," she mouthed silently. Marcus mouthed back, "Thank you," because she'd given him just as much as he'd given her, purpose, hope, proof that love really could conquer even the darkest circumstances. They turned a corner, the group staying close together, and disappeared into the beautiful Geneva night, their laughter echoing off the old buildings, a family reunited, a miracle realized, a story that would continue long after this moment faded into memory. And somewhere across the world, in workshops and factories and homes where people toiled without freedom, other daughters and sons waited for their own miracles, for someone to see them truly and refuse to walk away. Because of Sarah's work, because of her voice, because of her refusal to let her suffering be meaningless, some of them would be found, some of them would be freed, some of them would get their own impossible reunion. The work would continue. The fight wasn't over. But tonight at least there was joy. There was family. There was love that had refused to quit. And in the end, Marcus thought, that was what mattered most. Not the years that were lost, but the life that was found. Not the darkness that had tried to consume them, but the light they'd managed to keep alive until it could guide them back to each other. Sarah was home, not just physically, but in every way that mattered. And Marcus, who had spent 15 years with a hole in his heart, was finally whole again too. The miracle wasn't just finding her. The miracle was what came after. The healing, the growth, the transformation of pain into purpose. The miracle was standing here, together, proof that even the most broken things could be mended, even the most lost could be found, even the darkest nights eventually gave way to dawn. They walked on through Geneva, a family united by love and loss and the unshakable belief that some bonds can never truly be broken, no matter how much time or distance or trauma tries to sever them. And above them, stars shone in the clear Swiss sky, the same stars that had watched over a little girl lost in Athens, a young woman enslaved in Cairo, and a father who never stopped looking, silent witnesses to a story of darkness and light, of despair and hope, of a love that truly never quit. The end, and yet also just the beginning.